Doctors, lawyers, accountants, politicians, presidents, of course they should be men. After all, men are better at doing certain jobs than women. It was the early 90s, and that's what my teenage mind used to believe is true. Except, of course, when it came to teachers or nurses, because women, being naturally nurturing and better listeners, made these jobs safe ones, in my opinion, and some of the few where a woman's skills surpassed a man's. Oh, and comedians, because it turns out women can be funny too. Who knew? This was just one of many generational mindsets passed down in my family and specifically to me that I guarded deeply and held close to my chest, almost like an heirloom. And just like any other valuable piece of jewelry passed down from generation to generation, I would never be the one to disrupt the flow of these jewels of ideas as they made their way from great-grandmother to grandmother to mother to daughter, and eventually continue their reproduction through the hosts that would one day be my two girls. And so one thing I knew, my job wasn't to question why anyone in my lineage had ever bought into a certain mindset to begin with, because whether that mindset served me or not, whether it was relevant to me as a woman living in this day and age, it defined us as a group of people, and that was far more important than the quest for my own identity could ever be. These deeply programmed mindsets are embedded in such a way where they define how we're seen in society, how we work, how we carry ourselves, and even how we fight. Mindsets can keep us constrained and bound to outdated limitations, and when we attempt to shift them, they fight back with guilt, fear of change, and entitlement. The ultimate goal of a mindset is preservation. To safeguard who we are as individuals, as a family, as a group, as a culture, and to continue the traditions of politics, religion, and gender roles. To put ourselves in the position of breaking generational mindsets would mean we would become the middle person between what was and what could be, the one who discerns what is no longer effective, the change agent breaking the connection with what we've always been and how it's always been done, and becoming the birthing medium for something new. In his book, The Idea of Historical Reoccurrence in Western Thought, G.W. Tromp suggests that the past teaches us lessons for future action and that the same sorts of events which have happened before will reoccur. This isn't just limited to politics, but is inclusive of everyday human behavior and is explained as patterns of reoccurrence found in both good and bad events. Of course, we get to choose what it is we're going to reenact. One of the best depictions of this theory that shows the power of breaking generational mindsets is the bicycle craze of the 1890s, and how a group of women who were seen in society as caretakers and homemakers, whose role was exclusively to have children and find their purpose inside the home, decided to break generational mindsets by doing this thing that really wasn't meant for them, and that was to ride a bike. Little did they know that with this mere act of riding a bike, they were creating a blueprint for breaking generational mindsets. Like every movement, they were driven by personal experience, the dissatisfaction of where they were at in life, and an inner awareness that they had so much value to contribute to society. Together, they pushed boundaries within the safety of their group and eventually started to transform both the way women were seen and the way they saw themselves. But this newfound group of women that had broken generational mindsets didn't arise without a fight. In fact, it was the fight that broke the mindset. Many times when we decide that we want out of an old handed down mindset, others can get uncomfortable and can meet us with resistance, which is exactly what happened with those people that weren't ready for such a significant change. First, the women were no longer relying on men for transportation, but instead were riding bikes. And then fashion started to be impacted. See, it was nearly impossible for women to ride bikes with the fashion that existed at the time. Tight corsets, long Victorian style dresses. Not only was it uncomfortable, but it was an accident waiting to happen. So the women looked to the men for inspiration and designed their own version of men's pants called bloomers, because nothing says breaking barriers like comfortable pants. Soon, this new mode of transportation began opening doors for the women to be seen and involved in all the public spaces, and they were doing it all in what was perceived as men's pants. So in an effort to stop this revolutionary break in generational mindset, the haters of the day came up with a fictitious disease called bike face, said to affect only women due to an overexertion of riding the bike, and to produce unpleasant symptoms such as clenched jaw, flushed skin, bulging eyes, and a look of weariness. Sounds like a typical Monday morning if you ask me, and I don't even ride a bike. And though the haters' intent was malicious and used to dissuade women from riding the bikes by making them think that this medical condition could be permanent unless they stopped, they were actually right about one thing: the symptoms. See, just like someone could experience all the unpleasant symptoms associated with being a newbie riding a bike for the first time, we too can experience our own version of bike face when we try something new, like breaking a mindset. The mental weariness when we realize that the generational mindset that was passed on to us to carry on forever just isn't working for us anymore, not for us and not for our children. The nervousness we experience when we consider breaking the connection between what was and start to think of what could be. The stifling anxiety in the flushed skin when those that we're supposed to honor with our allegiance find out that we're doing things a different way and not the traditional one. The clenched jaw when we let go of what's familiar and open ourselves up to something new that will most certainly redefine who we are. This is where the fight takes place, and this is where the mindset is broken if we dare to endure. Generational mindsets can transcend individuals, families, and can penetrate a whole culture and country. In 2020, the world witnessed now 11-time Olympic medalist Simone Biles withdraw from the Summer Olympics to focus on her mental health. She was favored to win at least 4 of the 6 available gold medals that year. With mental health being such a misunderstood issue for years before that, especially as it pertained to athletes, Simone's decision to break generational mindsets and do what was best for her created an opportunity to raise awareness around the subject. With this act of choosing herself and her mental stability over the win, Simone was breaking the mindsets of generations of Olympians who had sacrificed everything for the win, including their mental and physical well-being. With so many misconceptions around the topic of mental health, and certainly viewed as not a valid enough reason to pass up an opportunity to win a gold medal, she was criticized and she was called a quitter. I guess you can say she experienced her own version of bike face. Yet it was this brave stance that redefined her and allowed her to come back 4 years later to win yet 4 more medals. Those brazen women that first rode the bikes, who were in pursuit of a better, more satisfying life for themselves and the generations to come, used 3 basic concepts to break generational mindsets, which are still prevalent today: the power of community, the power of our voices, and the power of one. These are the exact concepts I leaned on when my marriage of 17 years came to an end, because I had finally realized that being unhappy was a good enough reason to dissolve it. Most adults I knew growing up were unhappily married, and that seemed to be the norm. You stay in it because it's easier and it offers a sense of stability and it looks good for the family. This, along with other restrictive and inequitable mindsets that were in the DNA of that marriage, eventually brought me to the point of confronting my dissatisfaction and making the crucial decision that I would not pass these convictions on to my daughters. I would not stay together for the kids. I would not rely on a man for personal advancement. I would not accept any type of abuse as part of a normal relationship. I simply would not. And many times, even when our intentions are good, things tend to get worse before they get better, which is what I experienced when I found myself working 3 jobs to support myself because I wanted to break the generational mindset of no longer relying on a man. Or the frustration and feelings of being completely lost when I started to learn how to manage my own finances and bills, something I was completely unfamiliar with. I could almost hear the murmurs of those countless ancestors I had disappointed by my choice to go at it alone. Not only did I have clenched jaw, flushed skin, and weariness, but the bulging eyes the day I saw a snake in my backyard and realized that I, and I alone, had to deal with it, all because I was opening myself up to something new, breaking what was in search of what could be. If I had ever experienced bike face, it was then. Turns out breaking generational mindsets is not for the faint of heart or those with a fear of reptiles. But I held on tight as I rode through the rough patches, and I endured. Finding community brings support to the breaking of generational mindsets. Our voices spread the possibility of it, and it all begins with the power of one person, you and I. Those women who first rode the bikes back in the day became aware of their internal value, which was the catalyst for change collectively. Their experience, though unique for each, was one and the same. They found support in each other, and it didn't take long before they realized that if one could do it, the other one could too. Building community when breaking a generational mindset is crucial. This is what I did when I needed to get through my bike face moment. I surrounded myself with women who had already been where I was trying to go, both physically and mentally, and I followed the path that they had already carved out. There's power in community because through shared stories is how our potential is awakened. One flame ignites the next. Breaking generational mindsets finds support in community, and our voices are how we pass it on to the next generation. There's no doubt that divorce or separation of parents can be something traumatic in a child's life. This was one of my greatest concerns going through it. My daughters were the very impressionable age of young teenagers when this all happened, but as awful as it was for them to see their family unit fall apart, I can confidently say that what they gained was more than what they lost. I used the only thing available to me at the moment to make the best of this situation, my voice. I used it to correct what they had seen throughout the years and thought was normal. I used it to embolden them. I used it to redefine what was acceptable to me as a woman and by default to them. And most importantly, I used it to bury the seeds of new mindsets, which today I can say continue to grow and blossom in the lives of these two confident young women. Our voices matter. And the last component to breaking generational mindsets, where it all begins really, the power of one. One woman deciding to take a leap of faith for herself, for her children, and for her children's children. One woman willing to stand in the middle to become the conduit for change because she realizes that the risk of continuing to live life how she's always lived it is far bigger than the risk of trying something new. One woman determined to create positive change and impact through new ideas, actions, and beliefs. That's all it takes, just one woman. Undoubtedly, generational mindsets exist across every culture and in every area of life. Finances, relationships, careers, and the list goes on. Mindsets attempt to go unnoticed at all times as this makes for their highest chance of survival. They disguise themselves as static in nature and often go by the alias of personality or character. They fight back at the mere threat of being changed or displaced by convincing us that they're carved in stone and that we're better off together. Generational mindsets do all this because they know the moment we discover they're replaceable, everything changes. Sometime after the divorce, after I had gained a little financial and emotional stability, I became obsessed with learning how to build generational wealth, yet another area where generational mindsets had kept me limited. I watched YouTube videos, joined communities, and read as many books as I could about IRAs, mutual funds, stocks, and anything that could increase my knowledge on the subject. I was determined to learn and to pass this knowledge on to my daughters and to position them for success in the future. After all, what could be more valuable to pass on to our children than generational wealth? What could they inherit that would impact them and their children for years to come? Today, I realize there are many possible answers to that question and many things that can surpass a financial inheritance in value. And though these non-traditional heirlooms tend to vary depending on culture, at their core, their worth and purpose is the same: to change the narrative for generations to come. Things like self-advocacy and being confident instead of the long-held belief that being quiet, pleasing others, or keeping our head down should be our demeanor in any given situation. Making a career out of anything that interests us despite the educational pressure to pursue money careers such as engineers, doctors, or anything STEM because those are deemed as the safe ones. Love marriages versus arranged marriages. Being outspoken instead of keeping a low profile. Having a higher representation in spaces like politics because our voices count too. The list is endless. In my quest to give my daughters something solid to stand on and security that was long-lasting, I eventually realized that I had already passed down the most valuable asset I could ever give them. That thing that was worth far more than any piece of jewelry or any monetary amount. That thing that would make them not only prosperous in material gains, but in their minds as well. And that was freedom. Freedom from any predetermined belief or viewpoint that comes from generational mindsets that would limit them or keep them bound to an unsatisfying life. And along with that, the ability to create their own. This is how we change culture. And this is how we change generations to come. Thank you so much.